For unto us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. These are the powerful words that we find in Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah is speaking these words in a time where his community was experiencing everything and anything opposite of peace. He was speaking to a community that was in the midst of political turmoil. And the fragile, patched-together government that they had was on the brink of collapse. They were facing constant threats, both from inside the community for people struggling with power and wanting to do the right thing but differently, and outside of the community. People trying to take what they had, people trying to take over to make their nation and their community larger at the expense of the nation of Israel. They were experiencing poverty because of all the wars that they had fought. Their economy was entirely decimated by the struggles and battles that had been fought for generations before them. And in the midst of all this, in the midst of the perfect and pristine time, Isaiah speaks these words to the community. This future idea that is designed to bring a present hope. He writes and says poetically, "Unto us a son will be given." And the government, the system that makes all of this work, is going to rest on his shoulders. He's going to carry it. He's going to be kind of the hub of the wheel. And he is going to be called a Wonderful Counselor. Mighty God. An everlasting Father. Something that doesn't ebb and flow or disappear just when things get tough or he gets tired. And a Prince of Peace. Can you imagine hearing these words? With political turmoil, can you imagine hearing these words with economy on the brink of collapse? Can you imagine hearing these words where people are constantly fighting and feeling out threats from in their community and outside of their community? Can you imagine what the weight the words would or would not carry in your story? This idea that Isaiah is promoting that says, hey, listen, I know things are tough one day, but there's going to be a time when this isn't going to be the case, because in a future time, something's going to happen and things are going to be better. Peace is going to come. That's good to hear, right? But it's going to come in the form of a child. And as absurd as that may sound, Imagine if somebody looked at all of your problems and all your difficulties that you were facing and they were to say to you, don't worry, a child's going to fix all this, but they're not here yet. Not only is there absurdity in the fact that it's going to come through a child, but they are going to have to wait for it. And I don't know about you, but there's been times in this past year, and there's been times in my 42 years here on earth, that I find myself in a similar position. That I hear promises of things being different, whether it's a product that's being advertised or whether it's a political pundit, that things are going to change and things are going to be different. And I find myself just waiting for that to take place. But there's a problem. You and I generally do not wait well, do we? I think there's two major battles that kind of make that the case, okay? I think, number one, our culture is not wired to wait. We have things that we want instant gratification, right? Last night we have a tradition every week, almost every week in my house, we have pizza movie night, okay? It's exactly what it sounds like. And last night we wanted to watch the movie Elf. We didn't have the movie Elf. We had it on DVD. But we really just didn't want to go downstairs to get the DVD player, to hook up the 3 cords and find a way to prop that up on the new TV that's hanging on the wall. And I found myself getting frustrated, looking through all the streaming services, saying, why does nobody stream Elf for free? And in the push of about 3 buttons and 7 minutes later, I now own the movie Elf digitally. I didn't want to wait. And more than that, the next time I want to do this, I don't want to wait. Our culture leans towards and rewards progress and movement, right? If you're a successful company, more than likely you have metrics that say if you sell more and your area expands and we get more customers, you are successful. We live in a culture that aspects of that says if you have more, if you have more property, if you have more toys, if you have more of whatever it is, then you are successful. And some of us find ourselves in this weird tension where we need and feel the idea and the desire that we have to maintain movement and pace in order to feel like we're making progress in an area, right? It's about being more and having more and doing more. When's the last time you've ever heard anybody say the key to success is waiting more? Seems illogical, doesn't it? So that's the first thing. We're swimming against a current that says movement and pace and progress and power. That is what makes you successful. That's what leaves the mark in this world. And the second thing that we always have to face is waiting in the desert between where we are and where we want to be. When we find ourselves in that place, we often not only fight the cultural movement, we have things that are hardwired inside of us, right? Things that say, I need to do something, I need to move, I need to make something happen. I can't just sit. The last thing we want to do is wait. So when we don't feel like waiting, we start acting. And unfortunately, sometimes while we are waiting in the desert between where we are and where we want to be, we act not out of any other emotion other than fear. I don't want to stay here. I don't want this to be my reality. I don't want this to be the place, so I'm going to move and act, and I'm going to use all of my power and all of my might and all of my resources and all of my connections because I don't want to be here. Whether that's an emotional reality, whether that's a physical reality, whether that's something in between those two that we say, I want things to be different, and I don't want to be here, I want to be over there, and I don't want to wait for that to happen. I have a horrible habit, and this led me to problems in my life. I have a horrible habit of once I get excited about something, I buy all the toys that go along with that hobby, even when I don't know how to use them. This is why I have books on my shelves, which are now in boxes, which are now up there, that I haven't read. This is why I have tools I've never used. That's why I have 4 or 5 of certain things, although I do, every once in a while, when I do use one of those tools that I haven't had for 4 years, it justifies everything that I've not done, right? Well, you see, if I wouldn't have bought this 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this right here. But the same idea is true when we are pursuing peace, right? When we find ourselves in a chaotic and an uncertain space, and we want to be over here in a peaceful place, our first reaction generally is not waiting. Our first reaction is doing. And whether that's based out of fear, or whether that's based out of some idea that I need to do something, we usually tend to act. But the question I came to this week is, what do we define peace as? If you were to answer, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, listen, how would you define peace? What would your answer be? More than likely, for some of you, the definition of peace would be the absence of conflict, right? And everybody's getting along, they're playing in the same sandbox, everything's fine. There's bipartisan bills passed every single day in the Senate floor. It's great. Or maybe peace for you is the absence of need, right? Maybe poverty is abolished. Maybe people don't have to wait for their material needs to get met. Maybe that's what peace looks like in your world. Maybe it's the absence of fear or darkness, this peaceful place where fear and darkness is eradicated by what we celebrate in the first week of Advent, which is light. Peace coming into the world. Yes, darkness is gone. Fear no longer is a driving force in my decisions. That is a very peaceful place to be. Maybe peace is the absence of pain or problems. And whatever definition you thought of in your mind, my question to you is, how do you pursue that in your life? When you find yourself in chaotic, uncertain times, and you said, I want to be over here because I can experience peace and I can breathe and things are going to be better, what are your first 2 or 3 steps in that direction? I don't know about you, but I am often wired to use my own power. I use my own resources. I strike first. You see, Israel ebbed and flowed with this idea. Do I trust myself and move, or do I trust God and wait like he told me to? Do I trust in my army and my elected officials to bring peace into this world, or do I trust in the King of Kings? You see, Israel wrestled with this reality back and forth over and over and over again. And we read this story throughout the Old Testament as they draw closer to God. They say, yes, you are the King of Kings. And as their relationship becomes more complex, they start to say, well, you are the King of Kings, but right now the peace in the world is going to come through our King and our resources, our power and our might. This is how we're going to do this in the world. Do I rest in his promises, or do I move forward in my own power? And if you have ever struggled with that tension, do I move forward with my power? Do I rest in his promises? Do I trust in my army of resources and people, or do I trust in the King of Kings? And I'm not trying to create a false dichotomy here. Sometimes the answer is yes. But when you sit in that tension, I want us to hear the words of Isaiah. And there should have been a slide, but it wasn't, so my apologies. Because the reality that you and I get to rest in today, if we choose to, maybe if it was a chair that we could sit in, the chair that we can sit in is this: unto us a child has been born. We are not facing the same future hope as Israel, because for us a child has been born. And to us a son has been given. It is a reality that is true in this world. And I believe that the government does rest, if we allow it to, on his shoulders. That above all other things, that he is our wonderful counselor, that he is a mighty and everlasting God, and if we trust in his promises, he can be the source and prince of peace in this world. So when we find ourselves in that tension, we're confronted with the same words that Isaiah used. And what's beautiful is the verse before this, Isaiah 9:6. If you look at Isaiah 9:5, what he does is he challenges people, because before this he says, every warrior's boot that is used in battle and every garment that is rolled in blood will be destined for burning. This idea to say, hey, listen, I know what you used to do and the way that you used to pursue peace. It was through your warriors. It was through the blood that was spilt. It was through the boots that you laced up. But I want you to know that those in the future, when this happens, are going to be for the burn barrel. It's almost like they have this like cleaning out a closet, or like a Marie Kondo relationship with these things that they used to do, right? You served your purpose and you served it well, but in this future reality, you have no place here anymore. I know that you're used to using your power and your weapons and your military to bring peace onto this earth, but what I'm telling you is this: that when the Son is here, he's going to be a mighty counselor and a prince of peace, and all those things, all the strength, all the might, all your defaults that you were used to will have no place anymore. You don't need them. I sold the desk that was in the office back there. Solid oak. I'm going to elaborate a little bit, but it was anywhere between 250 and 350 pounds. Massive. Shane Kress and I vowed, after moving it from that office to that space back there, that we would never touch or move that desk in an official capacity again. It was a blood oath that we took with each other that day. And to sell it, I needed to clean it out. And you know what I found? Tons of paper files that I had not touched or looked at in years. Taxes from 2006. I don't need them anymore. It's taking up space. It's what I used to. Things from programs that used to be a part of Beacon 6 years ago. I don't need them anymore. This is what the cloud is for, right? I threw away hundreds of pounds of paper and products that used to organize every thought, idea that I used to have. Why? Because that had its place. It served me well, but now I transition into a different place. I don't use paper or files anymore. Do I still have them? Yes, I do. But I don't need it in the same capacity that I used to. It's the same idea that is being postulated by Isaiah here. Quit relying on yourself to solve these problems. I have told you that I'm a mighty and everlasting God, and I want you to sit and rest in what I have done and what I will do in the future. Quit trying to make things happen by yourself. Because even after this verse, he says, the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end to this. He is a source of expansion, prosperity. It is all centered on him. I was confronted with this picture that was from Twitter earlier this week. And I think it's Reverend Kramer. I don't know how to pronounce it. He says this. He says, we keep reaching for our gavels, our weapons, our money, our flags. Jesus reached for a manger, a wash basin to wash his disciples' feet, a table, and a cross. We don't define the power the way that Jesus does, and Jesus refuses to define power the way we do. This is pretty similar to what Isaiah is saying, right? In other places in Isaiah, he says all these weapons are going to be turned into farm tools because you're not going to need them anymore. So while Israel was waiting, where did they find their peace? Because the promise didn't necessarily change their reality, did it? Did all the political turmoil stop once Isaiah wrote these words? Did the economy suddenly get back to where it needed to be once Isaiah wrote these words? Did everybody start behaving the way that they should have in the world and in Israel once Isaiah said these words? No. It's like the rule list in my first grade class. I still got my name written on the board with check marks behind it. Do they still do that? I'm not sure if they do that anymore. Like 3 check marks was a really bad week. I never experienced that, of course, because I was a perfect child, which is not true in any capacity. So where do they find their peace? Their army is weaker than any other army around them. They have less resources. They have less people. And everything that could bring about peace is either in short supply or it doesn't exist in their world. And some of you know exactly how that feels. Some of you know on a large or a small scale where you have experienced this in your life. You have found yourself in a place or a position, either now or in the past, where you are desperately wanting your reality to be different. And you've exhausted all of your resources. And you find yourself stuck and stranded in the desert between where you are and where you want things to be. And you ask yourself the question, so what happens now? This is exactly what Israel said, right? They have these beautiful words from Isaiah. He spoke them, he wrote them down a little bit later, but everything was just the same outside of these doors. So they're saying, okay, fine, this is great, But if peace comes through the absence of conflict, I don't have a means to do that because their army's bigger and I don't have any resources. If peace comes through the absence of fear, I'm afraid every single day that one of these nations is just going to say, hey, let's remove this little roadblock. If peace comes through the absence of conflict, well, we have it internally in this community. So what can we possibly do? And what do we do now? And I think this is exactly the place where we find ourselves in the company of saints throughout the history of the church, in the history of God's work in this world as we know it. So what now? I think Abraham asked that question. As God invited him to a different destiny that involved him heading in a different direction without a map and without a plan. So I think Abraham probably once or twice in his life or in this journey said, okay, so what now? Hey, I want you to go to this new place. Awesome. How do I get there? Yes, you just go. What do I take with me? You figure it out. Okay, so what now? I think Moses probably asked that question, right? When he was placed in charge of a job that he never really asked for. He didn't have the capacity, he didn't have the credentials, he didn't have any of this, but he did have something great that God was calling him to do. So he probably asked the question, so what now? David probably asked that question when he was wrestling with the responsibilities that he was given, that he never asked for. He didn't ask to become king. There were probably times and moments during his reign as king where he said, I would much rather go back to being a shepherd because things were a little bit easier and less complex then. Zechariah, in the first two chapters of Luke, probably asked that question. Your wife is going to be with child. Okay, so what do I do now? Do you think Mary asked that question? Visited by an angel saying, you are going to give birth to the Messiah? That's an awkward text message to receive, right? See, none of their realities were perfect. None of them probably would have ever planned for things to happen the way that they did, right? Do you think Mary planned on being visited by an angel and saying, hey, you're going to give birth to the Messiah? Like that was her idea of motherhood? Even though the realities weren't perfect, even though things didn't always go to plan, I do believe that they all had peace. And I think that they were capable of having peace through God's promise. Again, because if we're measuring this idea, a promise doesn't seem very powerful when your reality isn't what you want it to be, right? But while they were waiting, I think they could have hope, and they were able to wait. Not move, not act, not deplete all their resources, not do all of this type of stuff. We find them waiting and resting in the promise of God. Even though their culture was not nearly as fast-paced as our culture is, they still found themselves in moments where they were tempted to act and respond on their own power first. And what we find in all of these stories, they imperfectly waited. And the only thing that was capable of bringing them peace, it wasn't the reality, it wasn't the power that they had, it wasn't the resources, it was the promise of God. They believe that He is acting and going to act on their behalf. At the core of everything they went through, at the core of everything that they experienced, they were able to say without hesitation that God has acted and will act on my behalf. And that promise, it nurtured them. It sustained them. And is capable of doing the same thing for us. I think this is the power of Jesus' words in John 14 that we hear. Peace I leave with you, an active, constant state. Did Jesus change the political reality of that time? Did he overthrow the government? Did he end poverty? Did he make all fear and darkness leave? No. But he did leave them peace. My peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Yet again, the powerful words coming from Scripture to say, listen, I know things aren't going as planned, and I know your reality isn't what you want it to be, and I'm not going to fix everything right away, but I promise I am with you, and my peace I am going to give you. And in the midst of all of this, it is capable of nurturing and sustaining you, just like it has for people for centuries and eons before you. This is the type of peace that Jesus offers. He doesn't overthrow the existing government. He doesn't back a particular party or a candidate. He doesn't go to war with the culture that's around him. He doesn't use violence or seek a position of power. You know what he does? He is present. Took on the form of flesh in the form of a child, and he is present. And if we let our minds expand for a moment, imagine the accessibility of a child, of a baby. That God comes to earth in this form that is readily accessible and available to all. He is vulnerable, approachable, fragile even in some ways. He provides. He renews. He restores. While Jesus is here, he continually sees the invisible. He fights for those who are oppressed. He rebuilds. He heals. He changes the systems that take advantage of people, that oppress them and make them economies. Jesus, when he comes to earth, he begins to change all of those things. This is the way that he exercises his power. He exercises his power by being present. He exercises his power by providing. He exercises his power by seeing people that are often unseen, by changing things that lead people to be oppressed or not have the things that they need. This is the way that Jesus uses and exercises his power in the world. And he says, this is the type of peace that I am going to leave with you. And this is so powerful because he doesn't create a message to the 1%. He doesn't say to them, you are going to be more powerful. He doesn't say any of that. What he says is, I am beginning to shift things for those of you that find yourself in the middle of uncertainty, or you're oppressed, or you're in between this place between where you are and where you want to be. I am here, and I will provide, and I'm going to do things to help renew and rebuild and restore everything that you see around you. And that's brought people peace. And his peace doesn't have a price. It's given freely. There are no strings. There are no fine prints. There are no minimum requirements. There's no monthly subscription fees. There's no attendance requirements, which is really awesome. There's no dress code. He accepts all pre-existing conditions. The plan for peace is going to be available, unlike most of our health insurance plans that change and don't exist in the same capacity as they would. Or if they do, they're like $300 more, right? Sorry. Just irritates me without end. You see, that's what peace looks like. That's what he offers us. This is what Isaiah was telling his people what was going to happen. And this is what Isaiah was saying. This is what's going to be offered. And when we see and we celebrate on Advent and Christmas, is this actually happened in the world through the birth of Jesus. And we celebrate that this week. We celebrate that there's a light that comes into the world and darkness cannot overcome. We celebrate that because of that, we can have hope. And it's not just hope that is based on dreams or emotions, it's hope that is based on the promises of God. And as we walk around, we can have joy. That in the midst of all of these things that we experience in our life, that we have a good and mighty and powerful God who is working on our behalf. And we also celebrate that he offers us peace. That he's working on our behalf now. Just like Isaiah and just like Shane mentioned this morning, he is actively working and has promised to work on our behalf in the future. Light, hope, joy, and peace. The four amazing markers that we celebrate and focus on during this Advent season. I just want to ask, where do you find your peace? For years of my life, I tried to find peace in avenues that ran out. Sometimes it was my own strength. A lot of times it was my own knowledge. Other times it was my own resources. For a dark season, it was a bottle. Where do you find your peace? You are not the nation of Israel, nor is the church. But you probably have found yourself in a place between where you are and where you want to be. And you've probably found yourself in a position, in the tension, where you say, what do I do now? Do I move forward in my own power? Do I rest in God's promises? Maybe the answer is both, but I'm kind of confused. Where does your peace come from? I just want to open that floor to you. So, I want you to take some time and think about that. I also want you to reflect on Jesus' word in John 14, verse 7. Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you for the peace that you offer us. We're thankful, Father, for the peace that you have freely given us and the peace that you're inviting us into, not just now, but in the future. Father, as we find ourselves in large or small ways in a place between where we are and where we want to be, Father, I pray that you would open our minds and our hearts and our eyes to the peace that you have made available to us. The peace that you have freely given us, not only through the power of your promises, but through the power of your Son, Jesus. Father, may we not only pursue that peace, but may that peace not only reign in our hearts and in our minds and in our lives, but may it reign in the dark situations where we don't see any light. May it reign in the different things that we struggle with throughout our days or our weeks or our months here on earth. May it reign and begin to take place on this earth as people constantly struggle to use their power rather than pursuing their peace. Speak with us now, Father. We invite your Spirit just to saturate this place. I invite your Spirit to open minds and hearts as we ask ourselves the question, where does our peace come from? Be with us in these moments. I ask this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.